my name is Colby Daly. I'm the managing director of the Build Healthy Places Network, and I get to work with Doug and a great team based in San Francisco. I want to thank Purpose Built Communities and Lift Orlando for hosting this really amazing gathering this year. I'm, as I said, really excited to be here today with this dynamic group of leaders to go deeper into what we were just hearing about. Really figure out or hear from them how it works, how it comes to be, and why it's worth it. It really, as you heard from in the plenary, these examples, there's a growing number, but they're still exceedingly rare. And when I talk to community members, sometimes I hear this like the mythical unicorn. We know that it's this great idea, it's amazing, but does it really exist? And this is the real deal. We've got it here today, and we're going to get into the roots of how it happens. It's a hospital, a health system, an insurer, and a community developer. I told these guys it's sort of like a joke punchline. Walked into a ballroom. And I can tell you that from my perspective, running with Doug, the national center responsible for lifting up examples like this, you're not going to get one better. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all today. Let me introduce the panelists, and then we'll get going. The first you already know well by this point, Eddie Moreton, the Executive Director of Lift Orlando. We also have Jeff Graff, Treasurer at Adventist Health, John Bozart, the President of Orlando Health, and also Tony Jenkins, who's the Market President, Central Region for Florida Blue. So with that, I'm going to kick it off with the first question. Can you tell us all how you came to be working together? What's the story behind your introductions, your interactions, and why were hospitals insurers interested in the work of Lift Orlando? So Eddie, let's start with you and go down the line.
I'll be quick because their answers are more interesting than mine. But thank you. You all relate to my position. If you're in this work, you know how important it is to have the aha. If you hadn't had it before, that the prior plenary panel provided, the real strategic partnerships available for advancing this work. Before Lift Orlando was a 501c3 or not-for-profit, it was nothing more than the group that you met yesterday trying to figure out how to be better at social responsibility efforts and private and corporate philanthropy. We went to talk to our hospitals, and each of our hospital partners were part of those very early-most conversations. And we're so really, really blessed in Central Florida to have organizations like Orlando Health, Advent Health, and Florida Blue. They really make us rich as a community because as soon as each of these partners first heard about what we're doing, they could not raise their hands up fast enough to be part of this amazing story. And so we knew we had triggered a nerve. I don't think we understood then how deep and how meaningful a nerve it was. But I'll let each of them answer from their perspective, which is really valuable.
Well, thank you, Eddie. So we've been involved at Florida Hospital and Adventist Health System since the earliest of days. I think it was back in 2012, Eddie. That's correct me, keep me honest, if you will. A conversation that started out and really as an idea and saw it come into great formation over many years. And as we started thinking about the problem, we as a health system, every time somebody comes into our doors, we want to heal them. That's our mission. But as we evolve as a company over time, we can't just take care of the people when they present themselves in our hospitals. So we need to think about how we take care of communities and people. And our missions, what Lyft was trying to do and what our mission is as a company, as you look at our vision statement, one of the major words in our vision statement, I won't recite it to you today, is holistic. And when we talk about what Eddie and the Lyft team are trying to do is provide a holistic offering to a community. And so our missions were really aligned very well in what we're trying to do. And we saw a great problem out there in the marketplace, which is why we were interested in this. We're seeing too many people in this neighborhood who were accessing healthcare in an incredibly inefficient way, presenting at the ED. If you take, for example, the zip code of 32789, which is Winter Park, one of the more affluent areas in our area in Orlando, which is about 8 miles away, I think there's 112 access points for healthcare to that community, about 25,000 people. When you look at the West Lakes Division, there's 25,000 people there, and there are about 12. So it's no wonder why that problem exists today. So as we saw this opportunity, we just thought we wanted to be a catalyst for change. How do we really impact people from the earliest of age all the way to their when they become seniors in our community? So it's just a great mission, and we think we can make a huge impact here.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thanks, John.
We were interested in getting involved because we know the consequences of saying no to Eddie. You just don't say no to Eddie when he comes and asks you something. For many years, our organization, Orlando Health, has been in existence for 100 years now. And we're getting ready to celebrate our 100th year anniversary in about 2 weeks. And as we look back and think through, and as we've gotten prepared for this anniversary of our service to the community, our theme throughout our entire existence has always been about improving the health and quality of life in the communities that we serve. And much like our friends at the Adventist Health System, we too take that mission to heart. It's more than just trying to heal someone when they come to the hospital. It's more than that hope and healing and compassion that we offer. We say if we really have compassion, if we really want to provide healing, we can do more. And the opportunity to step out and partner with others in the community to really show some tangible evidence of what can happen when you do it. Our history actually of partnering with the with our other hospital system, the Adventist Health, goes way back a number of years. I mean, back to my earliest recollections back in the late 70s when we were working together to improve the maternal and fetal outcomes that we were seeing and the poor care that our moms were getting in the community. And we came together to look at how we could serve the county clinic better. And our physicians took turns providing care in the county clinics, and then each of the hospitals took a part in taking care of those patients that had no insurance. Fast forward that to the 1980s, we actually formed a corporation with the Adventist Health called Healthy Communities Initiatives. And I think we were ahead of our time at that point. We were looking at some of the same things that we're all talking about today. Really what constitutes a healthy community. And so it was a natural for us to be part of it. And so we were excited to do it. And I'm thrilled to just see what's going to happen in the future, too, as we continue to work together.
That's really exciting. Thank you. Tony?
I think if you had a chance to come to the reception last night, you heard me say that a part of our mission, and actually it's our mission statement now as an organization, is helping people and communities achieve better health. So we feel like it's in our DNA as a company, and we've really broadened how we state what our business is. We don't even call ourselves a health insurer anymore. We call ourselves a health solutions company. And we've evolved into just playing the role of just being the payer, of just operating on that one spectrum. And we even took it a step further with our board of directors. Our board even challenged us as it relates to our scorecard on how we measure ourselves at the end of the year. And so sure, our scorecard has regular things like revenue and net income, but we started seeing something show up on our scorecard 2 years ago that was a little different. The last measurement that we have is corporate social responsibility on our corporate scorecard for the entire company. And we're evaluated on our strategic investments back into the community. So now that gives us the opportunity to make sure that we're aligned with the right projects in our communities across the state. So it was interesting that when we began hearing about LIFT, and as I began to talk with folks and hear about what was going on, I've traveled that area many, many times. And as I traveled it, I view myself as a fixer. When I see something, I want to fix it. And every time I drive down that street, my immediate thought was, why don't somebody do something about this? And so it was interesting when I heard that this was beginning to take shape, because we've all been there, that efforts get announced, nothing happens. You hear about the plans, it doesn't come to fruition. But when I heard that this was beginning to take shape, and I saw Eddie Moreton's name, and before that, I don't believe I'd ever met Eddie. I'm thinking, I hope this dude calls me. I'm like waiting by the phone. So I wanted that call. I wanted us to be engaged with this because we knew the challenges of this vulnerable community, and we knew we wanted to help be a part of the solution.
I will say, I have to add, for those of you wondering, you hear the logic for the partnership, but how exactly do you start the conversation?
That's exactly
right?
what I was gonna ask.
You met yesterday some of the members of our board, and I cannot stress enough the value of having influential business leaders as part of the quarterback. Because in every community, because those are the folks sitting on the boards, interacting with folks at the senior most levels, the community becomes a really small place. So at a community dinner, the Florida Hospital senior executive is there when the first conversation about Lift Orlando is happening, and Tom's elbowing Steve Hogan, and immediately Florida Hospital is like, we want to be in. And the first time we tell the story to Orlando Health, we instantly get an audience with the CEO and the senior team. Well, that's not because I asked, it's because Tom Sidema's asking that question. And Tony's maybe one of the most active community leaders from a community engagement standpoint in town, so everybody knew Tony. He didn't know me, but everybody knew Tony. And it was just an easy connect. We'd see each other at the classic game that happens in the neighborhood, and his company's been a great partner of those events. Understanding the role that business leaders play for opening these doors and having these conversations is really critical. So having the proper mission alignment and rationale should make it make sense, but we all know that doesn't always lead to the connections happening or the doors opening.
So it's really building those partnerships to lead to the additional connections that brought in the healthcare.
Just to add to what Eddie is saying, it's interesting. If you don't have that advocate, you see what happens when the conversation comes internally. People want to beat up the idea. How do you financially make things work? Why this can't happen? Why not? But then you get the leader stands up and says, you know what, we're doing this. Find a way to make it happen. And it's amazing that we can all have these conversations and figure out why something wouldn't work. And then having that right advocate behind it says, we are going to make it work. And that's what we see very much from, I think, all three of our companies.
It also says something about the community. We wouldn't have enough time today to talk about all of the partnerships that have come together in Orlando over the years. It's all about the leadership of our city, our mayors, business leaders in the community. It's just a culture of partnering together and working together in so many areas. So I think it speaks volumes of Orlando and who we are.
So true.
Well, and it's an excellent example, I think, the audience here working in communities that are committed to that kind of partnership. So it's a very practical example of how connections are made. And I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the I think innovative parts of your partnership, which is this impact fund. So together you have a $9 million fund that you are mobilizing to further Lift Orlando's mission. I'd love to hear from you. Tell us more about it, and how did it come about, and what are your goals?
So we started this $20 million social impact fund last year, honestly thanks to our friends at Eastlake and Purpose Built Communities. I remember it was about a third visit there. We had some community partners we brought up, and I think John Majors was kind of giving us an update on things. And I don't know why I decided to ask the question. Look, we love being part of the Purpose Built Communities Network. We absolutely are so proud to be affiliated. We've drunk the Kool-Aid for sure. But there's got to be something you've done wrong, some mistake you've made along the way that we could learn from and be better. And John said, I think we'd all admit that we underestimated how the success of our site would accelerate gentrification around us. And so we always wish we would have bought more land back then when nobody wanted it. And so that sent an alarm for us. The admonition was figure out how to control as much land as possible, as quickly as possible. And when you think about the question every single person in this room is going to get asked 10 years from now, after starting to do this work in any capacity, people are always going to ask, well, how many people that used to live in the area now? And it's kind of an unfair question because you can't control who stays versus who goes in many ways. People will have the freedom to do that, but you should or would want to be able to say you did everything in your power to make it possible for the families with heritage there and history to stay in that community. And so besides increasing people's incomes so that they can afford whatever comes, finding ways to control the presence of affordability and things that support the community and provide income generating opportunities was critical. So we started the fund with that goal, with the goal of raising $20 million. We're about halfway there, honestly thinking we'd go after the same individuals that we were raising money from to consider making contributions as accredited investors to invest in this fund for a modest 2% return and share 20% of the upside. 80% would come back to help continue funding the mission and its long-term sustainability. To our surprise, we learned it was a perfect fit for our banks. Our financial institutions with CRA requirements began to really communicate interest. And then our hospitals really looking at ways to leverage assets beyond gifts on their P&L. But I'll let them talk more about that. It's accelerated our ability to raise and deploy the money that's in the fund.
Yeah, and I had said $9 million. It's a $20 million fund.
That's the goal.
Where you're
We're
going.
halfway there,
yeah.
exactly.
And it's exciting to see. So I'd love to hear, $5 million from Adventist Health and another $5 million from Orlando Health. So, as you think about coming into this, where's the money coming from? Is it from your community benefit dollars? Is it a portion of your investment portfolio? How did you access that capital? What type is it?
Well, we're carrying it on our balance sheet as an investment, as part of our investment portfolio. And to answer the question about our community benefit dollars, we didn't use our community benefit dollars for this. We have very strategically placed our community benefit dollars to things that are enhancing to a project like LIFT. So we carry it on our balance sheet. We are fortunate enough in Orlando that both hospitals are very strong financially, and so it enables us to do things like this. And again, it was just the right thing to do. It seemed like a small amount to take off of our balance sheet, out of investments, and reinvest even more into the community. So that
Everyone heard that $5 million is a small amount, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you start talking with large corporations what is big and small, but
Yes.
it's obviously any decision of this magnitude we want to talk about extensively, but like Orlando Health, we are carrying it on balance sheet as an investment. We spend a lot of time studying the documents, understanding the flow of funds and how things would work, and the goal would be, obviously if we can pick the right projects, that are not only just mission focused, but also, can we create commercially viable projects that can kind of refill up the pot, if you will. And that's going to be, we've taken a look at some really interesting projects that have some appeal and opportunity for that. I think that's our challenge. If we can really do that, and you can make this a self-perpetuating fund over time. So.
Yeah, because to be clear, there was no lack of scrutiny on behalf of the hospitals about making the decision and making these investments because they were going to treat it as an investment. And that idea, honestly, Bob Miles, who's been in and out, a member of our board, was just coming out of the role of being an SVP for Orlando Health, and strong financial background, build upon the notion of doing an impact investment from that I think Tom might have been the first one to utter. And then Bob was like, that makes sense. We've got money sitting on our balance sheet. We could put that to work there. It's usually in conservative instruments anyways. Could it be a win-win in ways for the hospital to deploy that in ways that work in the community? And for us, as assets became available to move on them, to be able to have these dollars to move quickly on acquisitions, whereas if we said, when we found out the local Planned Parenthood office was going to close that particular location and that building would be great for providing better access to healthcare in the future or other interventions, to have raised the money through private dollars, to be able to move quickly enough to close on that when it needed to happen would have been a real stretch. And so at each time, having this social impact fund has been a very compelling way for us to be able to move quickly on real estate in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's an interesting analysis because you can't look at it like a normal investment.
Yeah.
So Eddie mentioned that the return is 2%, and it has a different characteristic. So I can't compare this to what I may be doing in emerging markets or equities or bonds. It's just not comparable.
Well, where did your capital come from, Jeff? Where did the $5 million?
It is coming off our balance sheet, so our investment portfolio, but you had to actually take it another step further and say what Eddie was alluding to is saying, what is the potential impact to our overall company from this? Having healthier communities, accessing healthcare in the right time, right place, right setting is going to be better for us. And So it may be hard to quantify, but when we think about it from a mission perspective, it makes complete sense.
Well, and just to, go forward on that a little bit more, I mean, Adventist Health has a mission that's built into your organization. Orlando Health is a safety net hospital. Those are attributes of healthcare that are worth paying attention to as you go out and look at partnerships. Those that have those inherent missions built into community, safety net hospitals, children's hospitals are often excellent partners for this kind of work because they're already thinking about the neighborhood conditions that are impacting their patients. Not to say others aren't, but those have been early movers in the space, and these are excellent examples. So we've been talking about co-investment as a way of partnership. Quickly, I'd love to hear other forms of partnership that you have together beyond investment, that whether it's data sharing or real estate or other ways that you've come together.
I'll let you guys jump in.
Any order.
Well, and leveraging the conversation that we just had about the hospital's investment, it's interesting that when I began speaking with Eddie about it, our really question and engagement was, what can we do? How can we get involved? And when it was shared to us who was involved with the two hospital systems, our business is directly linked to both of these fine institutions. So it was important to us to know who else was at the table, and we know their commitment, and we know how well we work with both of these. So I'll tell you, that opened the door for us then to see how we could join, how we can be a part of, and we were open to the various aspects of what we could lend to the project. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it was important for us to know that these entities were involved just because of our history with working with both organizations.
Tony, would you mind going a little bit further? I know you grew up in the area, just a little bit of your background and how that's informed the transition at Florida Blue.
Yeah. Well, I shared with Eddie that, again, my engagement and involvement went deeper because I grew up in downtown Jacksonville, Florida, and grew up in a single-parent household, and during the summers growing up, while my mom worked, I went to the local community center, which had a free and reduced lunch program, and that helped sustain me growing up. But even being at that community to see just over the years the disrepair and the neglect and how it devastated a community, and growing up in that, I always reverted back to if I ever had the chance to be involved in personally experiencing it and knowing what some of the steps we could take, I wanted that opportunity. So this whole effort is deeper than just the company portion. It's still an opportunity for me where relatives of mine are still in the community and in these situations. So it's allowing me to get all in and make it personal rather than professional as well.
Thank you. Excellent. Other examples of partnership or things that others here in the audience should hear about, ways to engage healthcare as a connector in this work?
Yeah, so one of the projects that we're really excited about is in conjunction in the LIFT footprint is our Early Learning Center project. Florida Hospital brought to the table alongside some other partners, Bainham Family Foundation, and creation of this Early Learning Center. And the question we ask is why would a health system be involved in early education? And evidence really points to the first 3 years of a child's life is very formative in their health, their wellness, their outlook, their well-being, and it has a multi-generational impact. So as we start to think about this footprint that we're developing here together, having that earliest impact is important. We're a faith-based organization, and we have a concept that we put together called Creation Health, and it's an acronym for choice, rest, environment, activity,
Trust.
Trust, thank you. Interpersonal, I knew I was going to trip over one of them. Interpersonal relationships, outlook, and nutrition. And so our goal through this early learning center is to embed those principles, which are hopefully going to impact the young lives that step through that center and have a really long-lasting, multi-generational impact to their lives.
I think the other one too is we just have ongoing discussions about a health center that we'll be putting in the area. They've already designated the space, and we're sort of putting the final touches on what that agreement looks like between the two organizations and LIFT. And so that is very exciting, I think, for the community.
And this very project, to Tony's mention about the excitement of having the hospitals involved, is in part what allowed sort of the leadership of Florida Blue to inspire a commitment they've recently made of $1.2 million to help this health and wellness center become a reality, to not just be another health clinic, but be the kind of place that holistically engages residents where you might show up if you're sick, but you might more often show up just to grab a cup of coffee and catch up with your neighbor. It's the kind of place where real life and community happens.
And let me say that my excitement had to influence certain leaders in our organization. We know that large corporations are focused on many aspects of their business, but especially one about sustaining the growth and the revenues. So I had to get the attention of our senior team around the project. And there was a meeting that our senior team was planning to be in Orlando. And of course, we were going to go through the normal performance numbers and all of that. And I shared with them, give me an hour out of your day. Give me an hour. And with that hour, I had buses come and pick them up. And we scheduled time to drive through the neighborhood and to have Mr. Eddie and his team speak to that group. And I'll tell you, that was a turning point. I think that the more that you can have people experience it, not just see it and talk about it, but you have to really grab their attention and have them engaged in it. That's what moved the needle for us. Once our CEO was able to see it and to intimately hear the discussions, to have going back and forth, that when I now go back and ask for financial commitments to others, it's already a part of their thinking, and that's what catapulted us to be able to get involved at this level.
It didn't hurt that their CEO, Pat Garrity, got to hear Carol Naughton at the Council 100 and was hitting after her talk. He's like, we've got to do anything we can with this.
Well, I want to be able to open it up. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, but you have an audience here of 40 to 50 other communities who are thinking about how they can engage with health. It clearly happens, and it's possible. So what would you say to them? How can they pull off partnerships like this elsewhere? Not everyone has an Eddie, but we all do have Eddies. We're all
Absolutely.
in it, we all have that spirit, I know, and everybody in this room has that kind of commitment. So what would you say?
It's really a matter of getting the right people to the table, being able to share the vision, get the people to the table that can make the decisions. All of us in healthcare want to do the right thing, and that's just our inherent nature. And sometimes getting the right decision makers to the table is hard because we're all busy, but I think it really boils down to that, is having the people at the table that can understand the big vision of what is trying to be created, and they'll buy into it.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think your point's spot on. It's the right people, but it's also uncommon partnerships. So maybe from the outside looking in, it seems odd that we would have two, the top 1 and 2 insurer, the top health system and the top insurer at the same table, but we do things a lot. We have that compassion spirit. We want to take care of our communities. Yes, we do compete fiercely on a day-to-day basis on other things, but don't be afraid to have those conversations. Go seek them out. Bring the right people to the table and find inspiration. Find your Eddie. Find the people that you can rally behind.
And I would also add, there was a question that came up around, do businesses have a role in helping solve community problems?
Yes.
That's a question that we had to answer, and the answer was unequivocally yes. And so think about, you're right, on some realm we do have competitive a competitive nature to what we do. But when it comes to solving community challenges in this region, we all know that we have to be a part of the solution, and we're going to get involved and get engaged. Listen, our employees live in the community. We're invested in the community. And the way what happens in the community, we view it as the same thing that's happening to us. So we want to be a part of that solution, and I'm proud to work in a community where the other large institutions feel and think that same way.
I just really stress that point Tony's making. Fanning the flame of that desire in business leaders that have an inkling of that understanding of true responsibility, not an obligation of social responsibility as a program, something they should do and tout that they do, but a real sincere passion to want to leverage their platforms for good. And that's one of the primary reasons for me to see the hearts engaged of our board members, our partners, our community leaders, leverage the resources, the influence, the networks they have for the greater good in the city that they love is an incredibly exciting thing to see. You are a vehicle, a tool for them to be able to live out expressions of that passion. And so for the community quarterback to not see itself as the hero in the story, but as a facilitator for other people who have a heroic role to play. Whether those are the residents in these communities, for them to be the heroes in the story of their neighborhood, the business leaders in your community, for them to be so in their context. And I think sometimes that gets lost because so much is riding on your leadership and your voice. You begin to believe that you're the primary actor in the story when you're not. The community quarterback is by definition a supporting role to everybody. You're the glue that holds it together. Everybody else is playing a leading role from their perspective, and seeing yourself as a supporting role is a key strategic advantage. And then I will say that understanding very early on from the hospital's perspective, the real numbers. I mean, when we first heard that the zip code we serve had 1/10 the health access points, and that's if you use health access points in the most generous term possible, right? If you describe like anything where you could buy or do something remotely healthy was a health access points. Even the places that actually provide care may or may not be the place you or I would choose to go to for care. And so that would be such a tremendous gap when it comes to service compared to another community, same population, less than 3 miles away. One particular year, the cost for this hospital, and they're actually further than Orlando Health, so it's a much higher number for Orlando Health, was $14 million in unfunded care because of people coming to their ED because that's free, right? I get seen for, well, it's not free. We all know it costs all of us when people do that. And so understanding the metrics for who you're talking to, different hospitals are going to do it for different reasons, just like any business, right? So you definitely need leadership. I think everyone's alluded to that at some point or another. Having people at some point in the conversation say, all right, I hear the math, it makes sense. I like the guy telling the stories, but the math makes sense. Ultimately, someone inside the organization with the right level of authority has to say, we are going to do this. Figure out the logic, do what you've got to do, but this has got to happen. That's the kind of commitment that you need.
Well, and what I love about everything that you all have said, it's about partnerships and relationships. Yeah. I didn't hear Medicaid waiver once or managed care organization. You know, that's not what this is about. This is about building relationships and changing the communities that you're working in. So I'd love to open it up to the audience if there are any questions, if they're
over here
at this point.
Someone at the far right, I think.
Is there someone back? Great, please.
My name's Arthur from Cleveland and the St. Luke's Foundation, American Academy of Pediatrics. So the question is, you know, a hospital's gone through a lot of changes over the years. Polio wards have closed, TB wards have closed, surgeries have moved outpatients, always some change in the revenue stream. So it's really a revenue stream question. I think Eddie touched on it. Do we have information from these transformations? If you transform a neighborhood from poor to thriving, what happens to the revenue stream of the Associated Medical Center and the insurance company? I mean, it's a rare opportunity to hear from the hospital and from the insurance company. What happens to your revenue stream? Somehow, hospitals have found a way to adapt to changes in the past, but do we have data or do you have experience? What happens? You know, because we hope that health improves, which mean fewer doctor visits, fewer admissions, which mean less revenue, but Eddie's saying, you know, maybe you have fewer unfunded visits and so you have more revenue.
Well, I would say that's the big challenge in healthcare right now. We see
It's the big question right now. Yeah.
providers getting into insurance space, insurance getting into provider space. But I think what we all are trying to do is take the common approach that we're talking about today, which is taking care of the whole patient. So it's not just within the four walls of the hospitals, it's building out broader networks, it's being responsible for their health, their outlook, their well-being. And there's opportunities from a business model to do that. Doing good by doing well type of mentality. And so that's the challenge that's not just on us, but it's for every health system, every insurance company across the country today. It's not an easy solution, but one that I know that we are working on every day, and I'm sure that my colleagues here are also doing. So.
I know, Tony, you guys have done a lot of thinking about this from relevant to that question as well as an organization.
Yeah, so my response would be one of the things that we track and we take a look at are what are all of the drivers of cost, right? And so we know that as we're looking into our communities, when you think about the challenges around the social detriments that are out there of health and population health, and what are some of the things that folks are struggling with chronic care, all of those things are causing folks to continually going to our emergency rooms, hospitals. Our goal is to ultimately take a look at all of those things and ways that we can engage folks and educate them around prevention, wellness, health, but it's also around making sure that folks have access and it's convenience, it's in their neighborhoods. All of those things are going to contribute to hopefully lowering those costs. Then we as insurers can offer us all lower premiums. Because that's, again, where we want to make sure that we're playing our role to help understand everything that's happening with our engagement to ultimately make sure that access and affordability is a part of how we can all help play a role in the whole cost drivers.
And that's I'm sorry, John, but that's a challenge that's upon us here today. We're trying not to do the same old solutions. We have to do something that's really innovative. That's why, as Eddie talks about, how do we bring a community together? How do we make this feel like it's a part of your community? How do we engage in really easy, really good conversations about our health? How do we educate? How do we make sure that there's proper mental health at these facilities? That's something that's often vastly ignored in communities like this and communities across America. So it's bringing all those pieces together in a community. We know we're going to do something interesting. We know it's going to be impactful.
John, did you?
I think you mentioned the revenue stream. I think that the revenue stream, as you look out into the future, you're seeing now 30 to 40% of your revenue stream really being based on value-based care and being paid for value-based care. And as I think we get into more of the population health, that's where you're going to see the gain in revenue is by the savings and improvement that you get out of better outcomes for the residents of the community who have access to better health care.
Thank you.
Another question, please.
Sure. My name is Phil from Orlando. I'm assuming these investments you're talking about come from margin, and I'm thinking about. I know a lot of people in the community who don't have health insurance, and some who've been on affordable care insurance, miss a month or two and get bumped from the insurance, and they'll say things like, and then they hear about all this investment happening in their own community through the health care, and they're like doing, well, maybe if there wouldn't be less investment if they charge less, and but I'd have health insurance. So that they kind of like what's available for investment seems to come from, kind of being efficient at your services, which is great, but it's also like what's held into account, like what keeps people in insurance if they, if fall behind a couple months, don't get bumped from it. Where's the balance there?
So I think there's no, having been in this business now for 40 plus years, I don't know that there's ever been a definition that says what is the appropriate return for health care for a not-for-profit hospital. I think personally the appropriate return for health care is to cover your costs, provide for a cushion for the future, and then reinvest all of those excess revenues over expenses into the community for better health care for everyone. And as I look back,
That's very good.
as I look back at the history of these two organizations, I happen to know our hospital systems very well, having been in that community for a long time. That's really who we are. I mean, yes, healthcare is expensive. There's no question about it. It's expensive. We work daily with our insurer partners and large employers to try to do everything we can to bring that cost down. But we believe we're good stewards in the community because we are reinvesting those dollars back into healthcare needs of the community. And so I don't know any other answer. My colleagues might have an answer.
I mean,
for you,
all three of our organizations are not-for-profit.
We're all not-for-profit.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we don't have shareholders that we're having to deliver our excess returns to. 75% of our operating earnings are going back into our infrastructure to provide more services, provide more access points, and to improve healthcare overall. So that's key to our mission and something that I think is a key differentiating factor for our style of healthcare versus others.
Yeah, well, one of my friends likes to say that you all are making a lot of nonprofit, though. So, I mean, I'm glad you invested well, but it's still like, I mean, like solving that riddle is like maybe, I don't know who does that, as far as like keeping people insured, keeping them going to the doctor, not waiting 2 weeks so something gets more serious is something I don't quite see solved yet. So, but I do appreciate all the things you're doing.
You know, it's interesting, just one other piece. Eddie and I had this conversation right before we came in because some folks don't realize that insurers can be not-for-profit, and we are not-for-profit health insurer. And I remember many years ago when healthcare reform discussions were taking place, there were commercials out about the outrageous profits of the insurance companies. And I'll share with you that as a not-for-profit insurer, I will share with you that our range of our net profit last year was a whopping 4%. So again, we have to be wise stewards of our money, and we have to look at our investments because we know the premium costs that our members are providing. And so I would echo the sharing what these guys have shared around what we do from an investment standpoint.
It's helpful for those of you hearing this conversation, thinking about how am I going to have this conversation back in our community. That question that Phil offered is exactly what some people will run into. So, well, if I make this commitment to you as an insurer, people are going to say, and that logic is a very real one. So that there's a concern that, well, gosh, I could have used some of that money to save on my last bill or whatever else might be, but understanding organizations that see the holistic need for investment, if they were just doing it, well, let's take some of these dollars we have over here and let's spend it on more opportunities to promote our brand. That's one thing, but more opportunities to improve holistically the well-being of the very citizens that they're trying to serve is exactly where you want them using those dollars, because it overall improves the odds of the entire ecosystem for health. And that's important to know how to communicate that with your partners in the healthcare systems.
Absolutely. I want to take another question here.
Hi, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Hi, my name is Lex Mills. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. Thank you all so much for your contributions to the panel. I think this local investment movement is so important. And I would love to get a better sense of what your local investment portfolio looks like. So is that investing in mixed-use real estate development? Is it investing in small businesses? I would just love to hear some more concrete examples of what you're investing in locally.
For the impact fund that we mentioned?
Yes.
So the idea was to really use this. One rationale for the very conservative return was that we would be able to deploy these dollars around absolutely investments that would provide a return, a commercial acquisition that would lead to bringing an employer that would pay market rate for being in that space and be able to pay back our investors. But owing such a small percent to all of our investors allows for also the use of that same fund towards things that may not bring back such a great return, like the acquisition of land for an early learning center or a Boys and Girls Club, where you're not looking for a higher return from that investment. And so though there are opportunities for those of you contemplating such a strategy, when you look at the typical ask of, let's say, a family foundation who's trying to get 5% back from their corpus every year, you could do a slightly higher rate to participate in that space. For them, it's putting their money to work at the same rate they're already limiting it, because that's how much they want to spend from their corpus every year. So looking at that focus for us, it outweighed the opportunity of making sure the money was flexible. Not every investment had to provide the maximum return opportunity, because we had already bought in with our investors that we were not going to aim for that. It's given us options for what things we're able to go after. Otherwise, you might be committed to only the highest yield acquisitions and investments possible.
Eddie, maybe just say a word about, you said earlier that banks are this is perfect for banks as their CRA motivation, and other funder. Who else is coming on board with the Impact Fund?
So banks, I think you'll find in your community, may be a mixed bag. Some banks are more intentional and strategic than others about their CRA dollars. For some, it's just something we got to make sure we do every year. For others, it's a passionate part of their mission. And so we spent the better part of last year trying to talk to every single bank in town, and we discovered that the hard way. There were some that were really excited to get on board, and some who are still thinking about it. And so but there is a real fit there. I mean, the idea of them putting those dollars to work beyond the typical sort of charitable investments or some loan instruments, this is a great opportunity for that. And then obviously individuals. We've had some very generous individuals take advantage of this as a way. In fact, one of our local community foundations, the NCF, they're present in most cities around the country, the National Christian Foundation, they help people have donor advised funds. There are many forms of donor advised funds. They have an impact investment fund. And so their members are able, with the tap of a button on their phone, dedicate dollars to that fund, to our social investment fund, and then in some sense recycle their charitable contribution, because then as they earn the return from this fund, they can reinvest those dollars all over again, all within the structure of their donor advised fund.
And it's so, just the concept of leveraging those dollars, so leveraging the healthcare investment with community development dollars from banks, with community foundation individual donations, turns into a pretty significant capital pool that can be really, really leveraged for the community. Yeah, please, another question.
Hello, my name is Izebe Anamdi, and I am from Detroit, Michigan. You kind of answered one of my questions that I had already. The next one would be, when you make the $5 million commitment, is that spread over how many years? And would you do that within like a 1 to 2 year range, or does it have to be a commitment that is made over maybe $1 million a year? Or
I'll let them answer, but I will say both of these gentlemen represent each of their institutions as part of the management committee that oversees the fund. So we have board members of LIFT, and each of them making decisions on every call of capital that gets actualized in this fund. And so they're actively part of it, as opposed to dollars they say goodbye to and hope to see one day.
Yeah, so this is a fund much like a private equity fund would be, in terms of you make an upfront commitment to it, and the capital is called over time. Now, if we're very successful and we find all the projects that we're going to do within the first 6 months, then the $5 million is going to be out the door in the first 6 months. But this could take place over a course of many years. So we have to be prepared to part with the $5 million, but the timing of it's probably spread over several years.
all right, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think I have time, no, I think that's about time for us to wrap up. I'm getting the signal here. So I want to thank all of our panelists today. This is just a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate you.
It's a real honor to be up on stage with such inspiring folks, so thank you.